What we're noticing in the book of Joshua is it's not a linear development. It's not all in one place. Last week it was linear, perhaps not perhaps, according to the editing of book of Joshua, it was linear chronologically, but it was just about two people and that one woman, Rachav, in Jericho. The rest of the Israelites are still on the eastern side, the eastern banks of the Jordan, and they are set to go across, and that's what we have today. Today we have the crossing of the Jordan. As the title hints at of today's study, exiting the wandering as entering, the exiting as was entered. You remember the wilderness was entered through the parting of the Red Sea. Regardless of where that happened in the minds of those that wrote it, I don't know where it happened in reality, if it happened in reality. Regardless of that, what we're thinking of today is not so much the geography, but the literary motif of water parting and crossing over to the other side. In the case of the Red Sea, it's from danger to safety. And here, it's not so much from danger. I mean, the Israelites, they did have wars, and they're certainly not necessarily safer on the other side, but it's a liminal scene, right? It's a scene of liminality, where in betweenness, it's where you go through the water to get to the next stage. And that way it's a wonderful idea, I think, and something we can take not only from the story itself, from our ancient mythology, if you will. It's not about gods, but still it's mythological, I think, to even personal. What happens when somebody goes through water, walking through a flood, the ordeal aspect of it, or the healing aspect of the ritual of immersing oneself in water in our tradition and other traditions. So lots of possibilities here. And as usual, I welcome everybody to ask and go in different directions, but to try to stay somehow connected to the text. And again, in the background of our study today is a horrible war that's going on, and the loss of life and the violence and the long-term effects that this war will have on the psyche of Israelis and Jews around the world, with the fears of the Holocaust looming up, with the fears of anti-Semitism, with the fears of existential fears of the state of Israel, the fears of a greater war going on. But also, I ask us to keep place in our hearts for compassion for the other side, for the fears and the trauma, the national trauma going on amongst Palestinians as well, because of this death. These are things that are going to go on for many, many, many years, and perhaps sometimes that's more scary than the immediate danger. Okay. Our text today, all right? I think that's the introduction. So in the background is this war, and also a little bit about, again, our mythology, our Israelite/Jewish mythology of how we got to the land of Israel, the promised land, and why and how we got there. And that we'll continue to study in the months to come. Okay, then. Sue Spicer, would you like to lead us off with verse number 1? Please unmute. Once again, please unmute. Okay, Richard, why don't you read for us verse number 1?
Early next morning, Joshua and all the Israelites set out from Shittim and marched to the Jordan. They did not cross immediately, but spent the night there.
Okay. What would you say is the important word or part of this verse? Anybody?
Well, did not cross immediately?
Well, they didn't cross immediately because we're going to have a story. Yes, that introduces, there's a story to this. They're not just going across the water. There's got to be more to it. But the place name, Shittim, remember, I think you asked about Shittim beforehand, right?
Well, I like the name,
I know
Shittim.
you did, yeah. So Dan actually took the time to look up what acacia trees are in this country, and they're a little bit different, as he found. But the narrator brings us back to the last week's story in two different ways. This is one of them. They left Shittim, those spies. They went into a dangerous reconnoitering reconnaissance mission, and then they went back. So the Shittim serves as an inclusio. It's a literary device that we see from time to time. And sometimes it's between one chapter, even like the beginning of the last chapter and then to the beginning of this chapter. That's a smaller inclusio. Sometimes it's even smaller, a paragraph within a story. And sometimes the inclusio is something very, very large, like going through water into the wilderness and going through water out of the wilderness. So different types of what we call an inclusio. And it was Alberto Sojin whose commentary I don't have with me here at my mother's. I brought the other commentary with me, but it's his commentary that I learned that whole term from, his commentary to Judges, in the story of Ehud ben Gera. If you remember the assassination of the Moabite king, who was very, very overweight and had the dagger thrust into so deeply, that story of intrigue in the Moabite king's palace that happened also in Jericho. And in that story as well, there's an inclusio of the psilim, the statues of sorts, or a quarry, some people say. When he passed through that area, that's when he was in danger. When he left, he was out of danger. So our spies, they're back where they need to be amongst the people of Israel. That's what's hinted at here. That's one sign of an inclusio. The other one is coming up in the next verse. Are there any other comments about this verse? Okay, so Richard, why don't you read another?
Okay. 3 days later, the officials went through the camp and charged the people as follows. When you see the Ark of the Covenant of the Eternal your God being borne by the Levitical priest, you shall move forward, follow it, but keep a distance of some 2,000 cubits from it, never coming any closer to it, so that you may know by what route to march, since it is a road you have not traveled before.
Okay, so the second inclusio, second mark, or the second connection with the previous chapter is the 3 days. We had the 3 days there as well, and 3 days is a typological kind of motif that one finds in different stories as well. 3 days. But the main force of this focus of these verses is, of course, the ark paving the way, leading the way. And there's something there's a taboo to it, right? You can't touch it. Only the priest can get near it, or the Levites who schlep it. But only that tribe can get near it. Everybody else, keep your distance, and yet don't lose sight of it, because you are going into a new way. Now, you could have said this 40 years in the desert, that they were everywhere they went was a new place. But it's interesting that the narrator emphasizes it here, as if to say, this is a new deal, guys. In the wandering in the desert wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, God provided for you. The manna fell, the water was there when you needed it. God's presence was there in a pillar of smoke during the day, a pillar of fire at night, and now it's something different. Your journey has shifted to a different league, a different ballgame. That's at least that's the feeling that I get from these words, because you're going to a new kind of a place. Any comment?
Rabbi,
Yeah.
should anything be made of that it says in verse 1, spent the night there, and then the next sentence says, well, 3 days later?
Well,
There's two missing nights there.
right. Well, because we're not told everything, right? I think the 3 days later was in order to catch us up with the spies that were supposed to wait in the mountains. I should have been more specific. Remember, Rachav, the prostitute, she says to the two spies, go up into the mountains for 3 days while they're looking for you in the wrong place, where they're chasing their tails. Then you can go back. So so what happens is this allows the narrative to continue after the spies are safely back. That would be my understanding of this. I hope that answers the question.
Mm-hmm.
No, you don't like it. You want to give a different
No,
answer?
I just think it's maybe an editorial thing because in one sentence it says one night. So I'm thinking, well, the next morning they're going to be doing something, but the very next sentence says it's 3 days later.
Yeah.
So there's
Oh, that's a
missing
good point.
time.
That's a good point. Yeah.
You know me, I count the numbers. I mean,
You
one
d-
night to me is one night, not 3 nights.
Well, that's why we're honoring you because of that number counting. Just a short commercial next Wednesday, a week from today at 7 o'clock at Agua Caliente. We're honoring Richard in our annual Ooze Do the Blues, Jews Do the Blues.
Am I
As
gonna
I
have to
think,
wear a tie to this thing?
no, no, please don't wear a tie. You'll embarrass me because I won't be wearing a tie.
Thank
Although,
you.
if you have that bow tie that you wore at your bar mitzvah,
Oh yeah, right. Yeah.
if you have that clip-on bow tie, you can wear that.
Oh, actually, I had a clip-on tie.
A clip-on tie. Okay. All
Yeah.
right. Okay, everyone. All right. So, if you look up to Madalena's window, the image we use from the Trieste Haggadah, how do we? There you go. Thank you. You can see now. This is not the scene that we're talking about, but you can see the Levites schlepping the Aron. It looks more like a. It looks from this picture. It looks more like an Aron Metim, a casket, right? An ancient casket. But this, of course, is the story of the tumbling, the walls of Jericho tumbling down, which we'll get to in a few within the next few weeks. But there's the idea that people are walking behind, and there's not 2,000 meters here, 2,000 amma that are waiting. Anyway, let's go back to um, okay, here we are. All right then. Yeah. Anything else from this verse from verses 1 to 4? Okay, Sue, you want to take it away now? I see that you're unmuted. 5 to 6.
And John, you don't need it.
No, now you're muted.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
And Joshua said to the people, purify yourselves, for tomorrow God will perform wonders in your midst. Then Joshua ordered the priests, take up the ark of the covenant and advance to the head of the people. And they took up the ark of the covenant and marched at the head of the people.
Okay, so the storyline is very clear. It's the priests. Yeah, we have the Levites kind of. It doesn't seem to differentiate here between the priests and the Levites. It doesn't. We know that the Levites were the ones who were carrying in other cases, but the previous section said Levitical priests, but it's that part of the nation. They're in the front. The people themselves, they're not entirely passive. They have to purify themselves. Does that sound familiar from anything? Moses saying to, Joshua saying to the people, the leader saying to the people, purify yourselves?
Before
Right?
Sinai? At
Yeah,
Sinai?
exactly. Before Sinai, prepare yourselves, purify yourselves. This idea, which this may be just short speak for, stay away from your wives that night before. Don't become impure in any possible way. Does it mean they all went to the mikveh? It's kind of hard to believe that they all went down to the Jordan to do their rites, their immersion rites. I don't think that's it. And of course, this is a story. It's not about the details. It's about in general. Maybe it's also just to say, prepare yourselves. And that's something big is about to happen. And this bigness is different than the 40 years wandering. I mean, after the giving of the law at Sinai, miracles happened, of course, but there's something that the narrator is asking us as readers, as listeners, to if the people are told to purify, let's pay attention to what's going to happen now. Okay. Sid, do you want to read the next verses 7 to 8?
God said to Joshua, this day, for the first time, I will exalt you in the sight of all Israel, so that they shall know that I will be with you as I was with Moses. For your part, command the priests who carry the ark of the covenant as follows. When you reach the edge of the waters of the Jordan, make a halt in the Jordan.
Okay. So here it seems that at least that one verse The purpose of doing it this way is to elevate Joshua in the eyes of the people in the same way that Moses was elevated. That's why I bolden the word purify yourselves. I think that maybe that's the idea. The idea that the narrator wants us to go back to that scene, and that's how Moses elevated Moses himself. I can say him about Moses. Moses elevated himself, or God elevated Moses in the eyes of the people by what happened at Mount Sinai. The same thing about Joshua. And Joshua needs, this is part of his ordination, his inauguration, his installation, right? This is part of it. And not just to get the people across the water, right? It's not just the need. Rita Claire, can I ask a favor? If you could, you hold the page in front of the camera, so the page kind of blocks you. We want to see your beautiful face. Okay, thank you. It's the dancing page. It's rather distracting. Thank you. Sorry. Thank you very much. Some people also, they listen to us while they walk around the house, and I get seasick. I'm getting a little seasick from, or car sick. I don't read in cars, right? Okay. All right then. So anything else on that that somebody wants to mention on those verses? Okay, so when you get to the edge of the water, then stop. Right?
Yes, make a halt.
Right, he's making a tzimis out, big tzimis out of this, right? You remember the expression, Sid? Making a tzimis, don't make a big tzimis?
It says, when you reach the edge of the waters of the Jordan, make a halt in the Jordan.
Right, it doesn't really fit exactly, right? So it's kind of like right when you get there, then stop, right? It's as if when the feet hit the water, then stop. But the pause is for effect, for dramatic effect. All right, Rita Claire, why don't you continue for us, 9 to 11.
Okay, and Joshua said to the Israelites, "Come closer and listen to the words of the Eternal, your God." By this Joshua continued, "You shall know that a living God is among you, and that God will dispossess for you the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivitites, Perizzites, Goshites, Amorites, and Jebusites. The ark of the covenant of the sovereign of all the earth is advancing before you into the Jordan."
Right, it seems to be a mini renewal of the covenant. Those nations, you get different combinations of them, but in Joshua, many times those nations are repeated together. It's kind of like a who's who of the Canaanite city-states. The one to remember perhaps is the Jebusites, are in a place called Yerushalayim, or in the city of Shalem, probably the predecessor of Jerusalem. I'm not sure everybody agrees with that, but at least that's what I was raised on. Even though the Hittites are way, way north in Anatolia, right? In that whole area, the whatever that's called today, in Turkey and maybe even Greece, that area up there. There, some people, I think if I remember correctly, that scholars posit there was a Hittite enclave. There were Hittite settlements before the Israelites, before our literature was written. And there were Hittite settlements already in the south of there, right? Every nation has different places where they stick out from. A lot of interesting cross-cultural stuff. But they're often lobbed together in this kind of a thing. Sometimes all you hear is about the Amorites or the Canaanites. And I don't think we're meant to think that any of them mean specifically one of those. It's the other. It's the enemy, the coalition of enemy. It would be like people would say, if there's a war, if people would mistakenly say today that we're at war with the Arabs. We're not at war with the Arabs. We're at war with Hamas. I would say we're not at war with the Palestinians either. That would be my opinion. We're at war with Hamas. And yes, Palestinians, that is, who are not necessarily Hamas fighters or members or card-carrying members, whatever, are dying and their houses are getting crushed. Still, the war, and they may feel, and the world, and the Muslim world, some of it, not all of it, but much of it, feels that Israel is at war with all this nation of Islam, right? All Muslims. That's not what this, that's not what's going on here. What's going on here is that there's an overall war from a distance against those who are living in the land. And the different stories, different traditions, they have different names. Sometimes it specifically means those people, if the memory of the text is correct. And sometimes it just means like, no, that, that one and that one and that one. And this would be one of those situations. But it feels like a mini confirmation of the fact that you're going through the water, stop at the water, appreciate the moment. It's kind of like, some of the trips, yeah, I mean, I did it as well. We kind of manipulated the kids sometimes where we would, before we get to someplace big, like Jerusalem for the first visit in the summer program that I ran in the 90s, we would take them to a overlook of the old city from the south. There's a lookout place, and you can see the mountains of Moab. On a clear day, you can see even the tip of the Dead Sea, a little snippet of the Dead Sea. You see the whole area. We would say before we go to the Kotel, before we go to the wall, appreciate where we are, what we're, what's the history, what's the stories we've told ourselves, looking at Mount Moriah, Abraham and Isaac, all the different kind of things. We dramatized it on purpose so that and at last I meet kids now. They're not kids anymore. They have children. They're grown children, but kids that were on this program, they were teenagers, and they'll tell me, how much they appreciated the trip because we framed each experience in such a way. And yeah, we dramatized it for sure. I don't think it wasn't cynical manipulation. It was educational. I'd like to think, at least, and spiritual. Okay, and I think that's what's going on here at this particular point. But then we have this really interesting term which stood out at me right away. I emboldened it. I don't know if that's the word in Hebrew. Do you see what it is, Dan? 9:11 or Malka at the end of the second line. It's not in English, it's in the Hebrew.
You shall know that a living God.
No, so one is a living God. That's an interesting thing here as well, and that's to show that I think that God, living God, means that God's presence is up front and close, which means a miracle is about to happen. But then it says, how is God called at the end of this section in English? Sovereign of all the earth. And in Hebrew, that's Adon Kol Haaretz. Now,
Adon Kol Haaretz.
Right, Adon Kol Haaretz. That stood out. That's not a common phrase, and I don't have a concordance with me, but I think on a quick internet search, I think it's only in two other places, or there's two other places that I found. One is Zechariah chapter 4, and that's one of these strange visions that that the book of Zechariah has. About an olive tree and a menorah, and it's a strange thing. So I don't know what to do with that one, but I did find it in Psalm 97, verse 5. And what's common to this scene and that scene is it introduces the fact that God is going to change the laws of nature. That's my idea, and I didn't find anything in the commentaries about it, but I think it's pretty clear. Adon Kol Haaretz. Why do we, in this part, use this unique, almost unique, very, very rare wording for God, master or Lord or sovereign of all the earth? Because of the earth, haaretz, the earth itself, not in a symbolic way, but yeah, if God wants an earthquake, God will make an earthquake. If God wants the waters to stand up on the right and on the left, as the narrator in the book of Exodus says, as they're walking through, that's what God can do. God wants the 10 plagues. That's Adon Kol Haaretz, and I think that's what's being hinted at or alluded to here in using this particular term for God. Any comments before we go on? We're in a quiet mood today, everybody. All right. Malka, would you read the next section, 12-13, please?
Now select 12 individuals from the tribes of Israel, one from each tribe. When the feet of the priests bearing the ark of God, the sovereign of all the earth, come to rest in the waters of the Jordan, the water coming from upstream will be cut off and will stand in a single heap.
Hey, what do you have to say about this, Malka?
It reminds me of the Exodus.
right? For sure. It also again has that same term for God, Adon Kol Haaretz,
Right.
right? Adon Kol Haaretz in this term.
Mhm.
Yeah, Vayamdu Neid Echad in Hebrew, and the waters will stand in a single heap. We're going to see a verse in the afterwards. I brought a verse that'll say, but very much so. This is very much an allusion to, an imitation of, a connection with the parting of the Red Sea, and the same words are used. Some very rare and unique words, and one of them is neid nozlim. That word neid is a heap of water. So, if you will, if you can't picture this, look at my square, my Hollywood square for a second, or if I'm seeing it. So I'm going forward. The Hermon is up on my right-hand side, the mountains. On my left-hand side is the Dead Sea. I'm looking across at the hillsides, Judean hills. Jerusalem would be up there someplace. I'm about to walk forward, and so it's not a parting of the water, right? The Red Sea, there's water everywhere, so the water has to go. Here, you only need the parting on one side, because once the waters start to pile up on my right-hand side, right? You can imagine them piling up this big, bubbling mountain of water, but the other side, because it's already flowed down to the Dead Sea, it's already dry, right? And so it's not exactly the same, but it was certainly. And I remember when I first was I forgot which lecture it was in, but I was tickled by this whole idea that the miracle kind of repeats itself on the way into the wilderness and on the way out of the wilderness. And that's what I do. And that's why I introduced what I did, the words that I did, and why I wrote I gave this study today, exiting and entering the wilderness, exiting as entering the wilderness. Anything else? Okay,
Just a
Megan,
question. It's about the Torah scroll.
say it again.
When we read in the Torah scroll, I think for Exodus, when the water's parting, don't the scribes write it in a particular way where it's blocked.
It's
So I
kind of
wonder why-
checkerboard. It's a
Right.
little
Why don't they
checkerboard.
do that here?
So number one, what's written in Exodus, I think everybody's seen it before. Whenever we roll the Torah and Simchat Torah, I always point that out. In Exodus, it's not the narrative that's written that way, right? Right, Dan? What's
Right.
written that way? The poem.
The prose, yeah.
Just the poem.
The poem, not the prose,
And
the poem.
15, Exodus 15.
Right, Az Hashem
Right.
Moshe. And I think I don't, and that's different than most poems in the other poems in the Torah are in two columns, like at the end of Deuteronomy. That's that checkerboard stuff.
Right.
I don't know what the scribal tradition is for Judges 5, Shirat Dvorah. But your question says to me that at some point you came up with, or somebody gave you the explanation that the scribal pattern of checkerboard is kind of like to get us to visually see the parting of the water. Is that what you're saying?
Is that true or not true? That I was told that, right?
Malka, it's true. If that works for you, it's true.
Well, what is the reason then?
I don't know. I don't know. For all I know, that could be. It would be interesting who says that at what period of time. Those are the kind of things that one finds in a lot of classes. It depends where you heard. If you heard that at JTS and you could nail it down what course that was, if it was a course about liturgy given by
It was a liturgy.
So if it was liturgy, then I don't know. If it was Avigdor Shenan, my teacher of liturgy, had said it, then he would have said it with a gleam in his eye. Some people like to explain because he was an observant Jew, he knew that. Or he would say, and we find in this 11th century, I'm making this up, 11th century explanation of scribal techniques, we find that that's the reason why. That still doesn't mean that's the original reason why. That means that as far back as that time. So that would be something to look at. I actually have a book about scribal Hilchot Safrut, and I guess maybe you could look in Masechet Sofrim, probably I would go instead though I would go like to Eitz Chaim and see what Professor Lieber of blessed memory, what he wrote in his commentary. So is that the real reason? Weiß nicht. I don't know. But it's certainly a lovely explanation, isn't it? Right?
All the traditions have it that way. Ben Asher and Ben Naphtali, they all.
I don't know. That's beyond my pay grade, dear. I don't get paid that much to really go into the details of the Masoretic.
I'm going to look and I'll let you know.
Although I will say though, Malka, if I was a soifer, right, if I was a scribe and I wanted to visually picture going down the Red Sea, I would actually have used the other way to have words here, and a big gap in the middle,
Hmm.
right?
I like that.
Yeah. On the other hand, right, you may know there's a midrash that expresses itself in the Dur Europos artwork, which
Right.
is from the 3rd century, I think, where the or 5th century, I forgot when it's from, but it's early. There's 12 different pathways in the water, which goes according to one of the midrashim that each of the shvatim, each of the tribes had their own pathway.
Hmm.
That brings us to the opening of the section you just read. What are the 12 individuals? What are they doing there? This is an interruption in the narrative. It was all set. Richard, I'm a little disappointed you didn't catch this yourself because there is the number 12 involved. It was all set. It was prescribed. The priests, Levites, the Levitical priests, whatever, they go forward. The other people, they stay back 2,000 meters, and hoppa, suddenly you've got these 12 people. Where do they come from? Wasn't in anything that came until now. So I would say this, Richard, this seems to be an interpolation. Or it was original, whatever stage it came in. I couldn't find anything on it, but I have an idea, which probably means I heard it from somebody else years ago. But in the literature that I have here, one explanation is it's kapara, it's atonement for the sin of the 12 spies that went into Israel. Even though it's the 2 came back all right, but it was it's kind of making amends for that situation that we've been in the wilderness. They had to wander the wilderness for 40 years because Moses sent the 12 spies and the people went after they followed the advice of those 10. Maybe it's kapara. Maybe it's symbolic kapara. Another possible explanation is
what I'm confused. What are these 12 people doing? Are they, doesn't say, it just says choose 12 people, and then they, for what?
let Richard, let's be patient and see.
Well, I
Okay.
didn't read ahead.
That's just it. That's why and if not, we'll fill it in from rabbinic literature, what exactly happened, okay? But yes, but it does seem artificial here. And Richard, that's actually your question supports the fact that somebody put it in at a later point. It's an interpolation. Maybe as kapara, as atonement. The other way is there are different stories that are about the priests, and then the elders are seem to be added in. And there's stories about the elders in the wandering stories, and it seems like the priests sometimes are added in. In other words, there's like a competition going on between the religious leadership, the priests, and this, not secular, but the tribal leadership, which would be the princes, the Nisi'im of each of them. But it does break the narrative, and we stop and think about it. And you know what it reminds me of? When there's a press conference for like a crime or response to some emergency, and the mayor or the governor or somebody or the chief of police or somebody, they're standing there, and then you've got all the other people that are there that are told to be there. They don't do anything. They don't say anything. They don't do anything. They're just there. They're part of the picture. And sometimes I'm going to have the fire chief say, they do that thing. You see it on, on local news, especially press conferences. But that the group of people, it's like, or other people trying to get into the picture. The whole thing where you suddenly see somebody's kind of pushing themselves in. You don't necessarily want them in the picture. It feels like that those 12 representatives were pushed their way into this picture. Not without us, you don't do this. If this is an important thing, I'm speaking from a distance now of the text, this is an important scene in the moving of the Israelites into the land, we should be there as well, not just the priests.
So next week when we have all the VIPs up front, should we keep an eye out for any pusher intos? Any people who kind of push their way into the picture?
Right, and you know who they are, Richard. Yes. Okay. All right. Anything else on this section? Okay, then.
I think the reason for that, it just came to mind, is that they want to show that everybody is on it.
on it, or everybody gets credit for it?
No, no, not the credit, but I think
Okay.
they're all doing their part for for a good result.
Well, that's a kind interpretation. That's wonderful. Yeah. Yeah. Great. Okay. So Rita, why don't you read the next section, 14:17.
When the people set out from their encampment to cross the Jordan, the priests bearing the Ark of the Covenant were at the head of the people. Now the Jordan keeps flowing over its entire bed throughout the harvest season. But as soon as the bearers of the ark reached the Jordan, and the feet of the priests bearing the ark dipped into the water at its edge, the waters coming down from upstream piled up in a single heap, a great way off. At Adam, the town next to Jerathath, and those flowing away downstream to the sea of the Arabah, the Dead Sea ran out completely. So the people crossed near Jericho. The priests who bore the ark of God's covenant stood on dry land exactly in the middle of the Jordan, while all Israel crossed over on dry land until the entire nation had finished crossing the Jordan.
Okay.
Wow.
So a few things. There's some geography here. They went across near Shittim, but the water stopped not right where they were. So nobody got wet from the spritz of all that water piling up. All the way up at Adam. Adam is Damya. It's to this very day. There's a bridge there. It's called Gesher Adam. There's two bridges that that connect between Israel and Jordan. Well, a third one was opened up near Beit Shan, right? But the two bridges that were there when I was in the Army, and much of my reserve duty was done in that whole stretch, patrolling the border or being at a motzav, like a little motzav. Yeah, an outpost on the river itself. My own personal policy was in reserve duty, get as far away from the headquarters and the officers as you can. And so when there was an opportunity for 4 of us or 5 of us to go down and be at an outpost on the water, and I did this many years, like probably 7 or 8 years, we had the same job. I would go down and I was the only one who knew how to cook. So the guys loved me because none of them knew how to cook, right? They were from traditional Orthodox weddings where, and I would make something, I would make it up because my mother taught me the basics, and I would make up whatever we had. I made stuff. And I remember one of the guys says, David, bring me the recipe for those pancakes. My wife, I told them that they were the most delicious things. I made pancakes, And so I said, there's no way. And so he comes back or he talks to his wife on the phone, and you could talk to your wife like once a day or once every 2 days on the phone, wind up phone thing. And she says, in the Vakazet, there's no way, there has to be a recipe. He's just holding out because doesn't want me to have the recipe. No, believe me, there's no recipe. You take a little flour, you take a little eggs, a little bit of water, you mix it up, doesn't work, you do it again, put it in the gas, sticks to the pan, add some oil. So yeah, I created a lot of interesting dishes in those days, but of course they all had to eat vegetarian because I wouldn't cook meat. Later on, towards the end of my reserve duty, when I was already about 40 or so, I was in an outpost overlooking the Dead Sea. I mentioned it because once we translated the article from German to Hebrew, and for Rosh Hashanah they sent like a fish and meat and stuff. So I made it, but I had my friend Chaim. I said, Chaim, come in and taste it. Taste it. Is there enough spices in this enough? So I cooked without tasting. All right. Anyway, that is neither here nor there, but it means that I know the area well. And the 2 bridges at the time was the Allenby Bridge. It's still today a place where you cross over, tourists cross over, Palestinians cross over, Jordanians cross over, Israelis, I don't know if they can, it depends on what's happening with policies at the same time. And I think the Adam Bridge, if I remember correctly, is more for trucks and things like that, shipping. Anyway, that's the geography here. The water, nobody got wet, and then it dries out, just as I mentioned before. And where are the 12, Richard? nowhere to be found. Which sorry, you're mute. I don't know if you're saying
They're
anything.
playing canasta or mahjong.
Yes, all right, okay. No,
Mahjong.
they were there for the picture opportunity, right?
Yeah.
For the photo opportunity, and then they went back to their places. Yeah. So very much so. So the words the dry land, the upstream piled, all that is reminiscent of number one in the source sheet. Go ahead, number one from Exodus 15:8, Richard.
All right. At the blast of your nostrils, the water piled up. The flood stood straight like a wall. The deep froze in the heart of the sea.
Right, a different explanation, but that one word nitzfu kumodnei nozlim, and that is from the poetry part of it, Malka, right? That's from the checkerboard piece. But that very rare phrase neid nozlim, a pile of water, a ton of water. Okay, Dan, why don't you read number 2 for us, please?
Okay.
Oh,
Number 2.
Yeah.
Granted, the miracles of the crossings of the sea are recorded explicitly in the Torah, as it is stated, and the Israelites went out into the sea on dry ground, and the water was a wall for them on their right and their left. So too, the miracle at the crossings of the Jordan, as it is stated, the priests who bore the ark of God's covenant stood on dry land within the Jordan, while all Israel crossed on dry land until the entire nation finished crossing the Jordan.
Okay, I bring this because we actually had this section, and those of us that studied Talmud in the summer months, we got to this section because it's one of the places where you say that blessing, Baruch atah, thanking God, praises God for the miracle that was done to our ancestors in this place. And so there must have been, at the time of the rabbis, still, maybe not necessarily the same place, but a place, Al Gdot HaYarden, on the banks of the Jordan, where they would go down, or when they're passing by on the road, they would stop to say that blessing. So already then, it's not something new from the Bible department at Hebrew University, who discovered this connection between the Exodus story and the Joshua story. It's already in the Talmud itself, and that's very much, I think, the intention of the narrator. So not only is it there brought together, but also from a relatively familiar psalm, I think, to almost everybody here, or if not to everybody, and that is Psalm 114. Dan, if you'd read that as well. This is B'tzeit Yisrael miMitzrayim, that everybody knows from Hallel, from the Seder. Go ahead.
When Israel went forth from Egypt, the house of Jacob from a people of strange speech, Judah became God's Holy One, Israel God's dominion. The sea saw them and fled. Jordan ran backward. Mountains skipped like rams, hills like sheep. What alarmed you, O sea, that you fled? Jordan, that you ran backward. Mountains, that you skipped like rams, hills like sheep. Tremble, O earth, at the presence of the sovereign, at the presence of the God of Jacob, who turned the rock into a pool of water, the flinty rock into a fountain.
So it's not just about one story. It's about the whole wilderness narrative, which is already in this psalm. This psalm, again, gives that inclusio of the beginning, the end, and it's woven together in poetic fashion. And of course, what I love most about this is not the phrase Adon Kol Haaretz, but at the very end, Milifnei Adon Chuli Aretz, right? Tremble, earth, at the presence of the sovereign, at the presence Adon Chuli Aretz. And so, I would have looked. Perhaps it would be good to see what Alter translates here. It would be closer to the Hebrew itself. But this idea that God is called the sovereign of the land when God makes mountains skip and rivers do this and seas do this. But this is, of course, a poetic echo of the narratives that we have, and most probably earlier than the narratives we have. Comments or questions?
Well, okay, little spoiler. I broke the rules and I looked ahead. About the 12.
Right.
So the almost identical verse with some more is at the beginning of the next chapter.
Right. And then we'll have
So
to
it's like
decide,
a scribal error, maybe.
right, or we'll have to decide, was that added at another time, whatever, we'll talk about that. Yeah, there's more to it, but there is an overall competition that many pay attention to, of who's in charge. Is it the king, preceded by the Nisi'im, the chieftains of each tribe? That's the one part of the world. Is it the priests, preceded by Aaron? Or is it Moses? Is it Aaron? Is it the prophets? Who's in charge? And there's an ongoing competition. I'm oversimplifying it, of course, but if you take the michlol, the whole general impression of biblical literature, it's those three things competing with each other. And of course, they're competing for the power over human beings, but above that is God, who is the one power, and how each of them have a different understanding of God as well, and of the mitzvot. The book of Deuteronomy is thought to be from the circles of the kings, right? But also with heavy prophetic influence, not from the Leviticus and much of Numbers and part of Exodus as well. It's thought to be from the priestly circles. And then you find that you have, but they were never to meet until, of course, the 2nd century BC, when the priests, the Hasmoneans, Hashmonaim, the Maccabees, they became kings. And that explains also why the rabbis disliked them so much and kind of left them out of their own narratives. All right. Anything else? With or without looking ahead?
No, you just made me think. If I were writing the Tanakh, I would have included 2nd Maccabees, and I often wonder why they did not.
Yeah.
And you answered it because they didn't like the Maccabees, but
Yeah. It all depends where, right? If
Mhm.
I mean, look at that. I think that was Gedalia Alon's theory, who was a scholar who died young and doesn't have so much, if I remember.
Right.
Not my expertise is Second Temple history, but I seem to remember, and one can see it yourself when you look at rabbinic writings about Hanukkah.
Mm.
The Hashmonaim are barely there, if at all, right? It's not about them.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. All right, everyone. So we will be meeting tomorrow for those that partake of the Isaiah group, but we won't be meeting in person tomorrow afternoon at the church because it is Arlene Rosenthal, of blessed memory. It's her funeral at St. Paul's. You're welcome to be there if you appreciated the contribution, her invaluable contribution to care for the unhoused in Palm Springs for decades. I'm part of I'm an officiant at the funeral as well. So, and then we will meet again next week on Wednesday. I hope it'll be a busy, yeah, I can do it. I'll structure the day that way. And then of course, the concert in the evening, and then Thursday morning and Thursday afternoon. Next Thursday afternoon is the end of the in-person mini course. We'll probably renew it. It looks like people are happy with it. We'll renew it going forward after, maybe in February or something like that. And then we'll be off. Sasha and I are going to Israel, and so we'll be taking a break. It'll all be in the announcements for 3 weeks probably. Okay. Yes, anything? All right. Thank you. Thanks for being here. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Have a good day.